The Tim Heale Podcasts. Ordinary people's extraordinary stories.
Welcome to the Tim Heale Podcast. Got a treat for you this time. I've got two doctors, May and Tim. So, May and Tim, can you tell me when and where you was born and describe what it was like where you grew up, the schools you went to and the education that you received? So, ladies first. We won't ask you when you were born, but where were you born? 'Cause you're a lady.
That's polite. I don't mind telling my age. I'm kind of proud of how I've aged gracefully. So I'll share. So I was born I'm October. I'm a fall baby in 1966, and I was born in a place called Flin Flon in Manitoba, Canada. So I'm Canadian born and raised, and the town Flin Flon, which has a very funny name, is a mining community. It was about grew to 10,000 people, northern part of Manitoba province in Canada, right in the middle of the country. For people that aren't from Canada, close to Hudson Bay. So we don't have polar bears up there, although we're pretty close. It's Canadian Shield, like lots of granite, lakes everywhere, trees, and very cold in the winter, 40 below type of thing. So my parents were born and raised there. My grandparents, both sets, moved there as young adults to both work at the mine, Hudson Bay Mining and Smelting Company. So HBMNS, or Hudson Bay, or the Bay Company, very well known in Canada. The mine is a copper, zinc mining and smelting. So that was what most of the industry was around. And yeah, my parents, both born and raised there, had me. I was the firstborn child. My parents were a little older, so they were married in 65, and my mom was about 28, dad was close to 30. So for times back then, they were a little older. And I was an only child for 7 years. I have a sister. She's 7 years younger. She was a bit of a oopsie daisy, as we call it.
A mistake.
Yes, an accident. I guess not mistakes. Probably not politically correct anymore, right? Just an afterthought baby.
An after no thought. Actually.
Exactly.
Yes.
So I grew.
1966 obviously was a momentous year for England at that time, because we kind of won the World Cup. And that's about the only notoriety that we've ever had in 1966. It's funny because I've never really been into football, and the day of the World Cup, I was busy with a couple of mates making some explosive in the shed, and we blew the shed up and took out windows down the street. And if England hadn't have won that day, we would have been in even more trouble than we was actually in.
Wow. No kidding.
66.
Saved by the World Cup. I love it. No wonder you remember that so well. Yeah.
And you turned up at the same time.
Exactly. Yes, I did. October 66. So I grew up in would be considered middle class family, probably. My father was a bush pilot. He's got a very interesting background, but what he did while I was growing up through my formative years in high school was fly for the mine, for Hudson Bay Mining and Smelting, and he flew into these exploration camps. I remember as a kid getting to go travel with him in his plane, in these beavers and otters, into these flying fishing camps, and was very much a part of my childhood. Flying in the small planes. So it's my first love instead of big planes. I remember the first time I got on a jet, and I was like really frightened, and people were like, "What are you frightened of?" And it's not a small plane. I'm like, I'd rather be in a small one. My mother was, she was a stay-at-home mom from the time I was born. That was her passion. A very athletic woman, very involved in curling. Of course, it's a big Canadian and golf.
Big lumps of stone, shove it down the ice.
That's right. I mean, where I grew up, you did curling everyone did curling. And then hockey and figure skating was big. And that was life in this community. Very close to my grandparents. I had both sets of grandparents in town, and so I spent most of my childhood with my maternal grandparents. We were really close. I have memories of every weekend, Saturday up at my grandmother's house. I'd often sleep over Friday night. We would play bingo in the morning, have porridge with tea and brown sugar. She was an excellent baker. I would then our family would all get together every Saturday. We watch hockey night in Canada, and then the Tommy Hunter show, and that's kind of my years. I Gosh, growing up, I was a good kid. I was one of those. You just had to look at me with the evil eye, and I would cry, and I would do as I was told. So I remember getting spanked, I think twice ever in my life. I was one that would fall in line. So the typical firstborn wanting to please your parents and be a perfectionist at all that I did. And so I was a good student. I was always the top of the class, and I had a lot of different interests growing up. Like I said, as my mom was very athletic and she encouraged me to try different sports, I did everything: figure skating and swimming, piano lessons, baton, all kinds of dance. Too numerous.
Cross country skiing.
Yes, we did cross country skiing. We had we'd go snowmobiling. It was really fascinating. The town that we lived in was all connected. There's lakes throughout town, and so it wasn't uncommon for people to be out in their snowmobiles, kind of go down part of a road or a back alley lane. Every community seemed to have a back lane behind the houses, and yeah, we would go down back lanes and then across a lake or a pond that was frozen over, and you could get through all of town and get up to someone's house in 20 minutes on a snowmobile. Ice fishing was something that we did all the time. And then in the summers, we didn't travel a lot as a family extensively. We were big into camping, and we took advantage of all the lakes, and we pretty much went to one lake all the time called Jan Lake, and we camped there with my grandparents. And then we actually built a cottage or cabin. We built that ourselves. I was in 7th grade, and I remember helping pile the logs on, put the insulation in. We built this thing, and we kept that up until after my mom passed in 2011. Our family sold it, so we had it in the family for many years, and that's where I spent every summer. Even in university years, I would come back there, and it was like a whole other life because people would come for the summer. We would stay June through September. My dad would be working, but my grandparents had a cottage next door. They built one in time, and there was a whole other community of kids and people that would spend a whole summer there. So we had these other lives in the summer. So that was really a big part of me growing up. And my childhood, gosh, there's so many different things to talk about. But as far as, the school years, pretty unremarkable. I was always excelled. I got A's throughout. By the time I was thinking 10, I kind of declared that I thought I wanted to be a doctor. And then it was a curse because it stuck. Everybody in the family said, great, this is what you're going to be. And here I am today. I'm a physician still. So I had different ideas about what I wanted to do. But yeah, that was it. My sister and I, we weren't very close. I remember because when she was born, I was 7, and she just seemed to be a nuisance, getting in the way of my freedom as an only child and ruling the roost.
Social life.
Yes. And so I ended up having to babysit her and drag her around town, which I didn't like. So we were not close and didn't get along very well. And, I graduated high school when I was 17 and left home, and she was only 10. So we didn't get to know each other very well then. Now, since then we have, but during those years, not so much. There was a long period of time growing up when my dad, with what he was doing, and I think it was 7 or 8 years in a row, was gone for about 7 to 8 months of the year. So he would work for the mine, but then they started doing more exploration and development all across Canada. And so they would go to Ontario, to Eastern Canada. he did some other odd jobs, but a lot of what he did was involved doing more mining exploration in the wilderness of northern Ontario. So they would be gone flying these DC-3s, and he missed, I'm pretty sure it was 7 birthdays in a row. And he would be gone, maybe come home for a long weekend if you get one. And my mother pretty much then became, the only parental sort of influence I had for a long time, which was kind of interesting. It landed to some, some negative dynamics there for sure. I relied a lot on my grandfather as a paternalistic influence, I would say. And then there's some dark periods of growing up. I was an avid band. I was in band. Started in the 4th grade. My mom wanted me to play the trumpet. I don't know why. I wanted to play something else, but she said it had to be the trumpet because it's all she liked to listen to practice. So it was trumpet. Anyway.
She was probably Herb Albert at the time.
Yeah, she loved Herb Albert. We had those albums and I would listen to all that stuff. Yeah, anyway, you're right. That's funny that you mentioned that. So I did band and then actually subsequently became abused and sexually abused by the band teacher for over 3 years. And there was other students, other girls as well. And it was this thing that went on for over 3 years and didn't come to light until one of my close friends, her dad was the superintendent of the schools, and she sort of figured out what was happening because of the group of girls and friends that kind of shared secrets. And she told her dad, and I share all this because it really did affect then the next period of my life in the junior high and high school years, as far as I started to have a fear of boys. I didn't really want any big relationship with men or boys. I was afraid to have a boyfriend. I developed an eating disorder. I became anorexic in high school and then bulimic in college years, and just struggled with a lot of bad behaviors and reaching out and so forth. So that part of my childhood is a big black hole that I've dealt with and really worked through as a young adult, and just before actually Tim and I got to know each other in medical school, but really played a sort of a dark role in part of it, and was dealt with really, I would say not even really dealt with by my parents, but it was the way they handled things back then. And we had to talk with the superintendent, and I sort of told the story of what happened, and we talked about it that one day at our family home. And he said, well, this teacher will be, laid off. The person, I think, got early retirement. There was no formal charges or case or anything. It was just kind of let go. And I saw this person in town for the rest of my life. And my parents never spoke of it again to me. It was one of those things. So that was a dark part. And then brought on all this stuff with depression, some suicidal thoughts in high school. I was still a high achieving kid, was like the top of the class, graduated with scholarships and got into university right away when I was 17 and left home. And then I actually got into medical school at the age of 19. Was still struggling with my anorexia and bulimia and what I wanted to do with my life, because I had all these other thoughts. I wanted to travel or maybe be a pilot. I didn't know, but felt all these pressures, from childhood. And long story short, went through some intensive counseling and outpatient programs, and discovered a group of friends that were really strong Christians, and then devoted my life to the Lord and became a Christian, and got healing of all of that through accepting Jesus into my life and forgiveness. The big story, or I should say, the big healing moment for me was just learning how to let go and to be able to forgive that person for what had happened. And that allowed me to heal as a person and get on with leaving that part of my life behind so that it doesn't affect who I am as a person now. I mean, it influenced and shaped me, but I don't hold any feelings, thoughts, grudges. My eating disorder is completely cured. I'm a whole healthy person. And, but yeah, it was a really dark time. So, if you pull that piece out, I mean, I had the rest of the childhood like was fun, filled with great memories of growing up, good friends. Um, I worked as a lifeguard as my first job in high school. I was a swim instructor, taught swimming lessons. Really loved that. Was a great swimmer, and had a lot of interests. And that's my story. I guess there's so much more to tell, but I mean, how many hours do we have?
Well, we just take our time. There's no time limit. I have a question. You said earlier that you saw this teacher carry on around the town. Did you ever later on approach him and say to him that he did wrong at the time? Did you have the opportunity to call him out on it and explain to him later on what he had done?
No, I did not. I remember going back in the summers of my university years while I was working a little bit. And I remember one time, and that would have been 18 or 19 at the time, probably 19, saw him walking down the street. And at that point, I wasn't in a state of mind or in a place where I could approach him. I was one of those kids that didn't like conflict, and especially by authority. And I still hadn't even worked through what had happened. So I saw him, and I ran literally to the opposite side of the street, deked into some store, and I didn't want to be seen. I was still afraid. I was still under the fear that he could still hurt me or have influence. So no. And then afterwards, I never again saw or sort of heard where he was at living. He might have moved away, but I never ran into him again. So I did not have the opportunity, nor did I hear from anyone else ever that they did.
Well, thank you for that part. That's been interesting. And I guess nowadays being able to destigmatise that sort of thing and bring it out in the open and able to talk about that sort of abuse and to normalise it to make it not acceptable is really important and needs emphasising and being part of a normal conversation that sort of behaviour is totally unacceptable now. And it always has been.
Right. No, absolutely.
People need to have that conversation.
Yeah.
And if young girls are experiencing it, then they need to speak out.
Absolutely. And I didn't get to the part where years later when my grandmother died and we were all back home for her funeral, my maternal grandmother, something came up and I can't remember how it came up, where I was talking to my mother about what had happened to me and that whole period of my life. And it came out that she told me that she had been abused in some way by a cousin that had babysat her. And she said, this happened to me as well. And my parents, they didn't, all they did was said, I'm sorry this happened and the cousin won't be around. And they never spoke of it again. And she said, that's how we handled things back then. We just thought, you just didn't talk about it and you would get over it and you just be strong and get on with it. And so at that point, the light bulb kind of went off for me that, wow, that was how she was taught to deal with it. She didn't know any better. And that was the way things were done back then, was just you internalize or you bottle it up and sweep it under the rug. You don't talk about it. And so I share a lot now just about it because it's part of who I am, and it's all this, what I've gone through is really played a role in where I'm at today. But to also, I think it's important for people to be able to be aware that it's important to share. The only way through healing is to work through that, and unfortunately is way too common, but not to have to hide it. And so I think that by helping, it gives people hope that you can work through that and you can have a successful life and work through all the issues that it brings. So
and you shouldn't have to go through that in the first place.
Correct.
And
Exactly.
I think that's what really wants to be brought to the fore. Is it's totally unacceptable, and it should happen. And if there's any inkling of it starting, then people need to speak up, and that's the message that we should be pushing out. Everybody.
Absolutely.
Anyway, let's turn our attentions to young Tim there. He's been sat there very, very patiently. So, Tim, you can tell us when and where you were born, and if you can describe to us what it was like where you grew up, and the schools and the education that you received.
Yeah. So, so interestingly, I was born actually in the city that May and I met in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, which is kind of in the middle of Canada, the prairies. And, the city was, I don't know, 150,000 people or so back then. It's about 300,000 now. And, so very agrarian. It was kind of the commercial center for large farming community. My father was a family physician. He was incredibly connected to the community. He was on the public school board for 25 years. He, was very involved in our church and all of this. So, but unlike May, I was not the high achieving firstborn. I was the entertainment center last born child of 4, and all my siblings are much older than me. My brother is almost 13 years older than me. My one sister's 10 years older than me, and my other sister's 7 years older than me. So I was basically the worst case scenario from a child rearing perspective. I was the last born and an only child at the same time, born to parents that were just about 40 years old. So apparently they went to the New York World's Fair in 1964, and 9 months later I was born. So everyone, the family joke was I was actually in New York, even though I never actually physically went to New York until 2013. So
they just didn't call you Brooklyn or anything like
that. No. Yeah,
That's
exactly.
Right.
Or, Bridge Rat or something like that. Subway token. Yeah. So, it's interesting because I was actually quite a good kid until some of my rebellious teenage years. I mean, Saskatoon was an interesting city to grow up in. I had really good friends. I still have a lot of friends that we haven't lived anywhere near each other for 30, 40 years, and we still get together every year or two. It's an interesting place, though, because there's not a lot to do. I mean, there's no lakes there. There is a river, but it's not really recreation material. There's no mountains for...
It's prairie,
400 miles. So you kind of had to make your own fun. And we did a tremendous amount of that, taking all the doors off of our cars and driving around with no doors on, driving through schoolyard parks, stuff like that as teenagers, just because, you were kind of bored. I got into a lot of automotive stuff. So I was building cars and riding motorcycles and stuff like that from when I was 12, 13 years old. And that's stuck with me to the point now where we're trying to move across the country. And the first thing we buy is a garage because that's way more important than a house. So,
to keep all the motorbikes in.
Yeah, exactly. And so my upbringing itself was really good by, sort of any objective standard I think you could come up with. We were upper middle class. My father was really well respected. That put a fair bit of pressure on us as kids to kind of not tarnish the image of the family name, which somehow miraculously we didn't. I always like to comment, my brother was the captain of the Bible quiz team in youth group, and I got kicked out of the youth group. That was kind of the difference in generations. And so, so the education itself, I think, was really good. Through high school, no problem. It was a smaller city. We were really well connected to, what we got taught. Teachers were really open. There was a lot of self-discipline as well as discipline in school. You'd get kicked out of school if you were misbehaving. So, kids were there largely to learn, which I think made a huge difference. So from that perspective, I think that was really good. I was a very average student, just not because I was of average intelligence, I think, but just because I didn't care. It didn't really mean anything to me. I knew I was going to get into university, and I knew that if I wanted to pursue medicine like the other folks in my family, then I would have to work at some point, which was a huge transition coming out of high school. Because, May was always the number one student, and I never, figured out how to study. And then, when I did, everything changed. I actually started running when I was 19 years old, and that was a massive game changer. It allowed me to really focus and concentrate, and I put in all this physical discipline from all the different sports I like to do, and that really allowed me to perform academically, and then actually kind of pursue what I wanted to pursue. And so from that perspective, there was nothing too dramatic, nothing like what happened to May, thank goodness. But again, I have no idea how that would have been dealt with. Probably the exact same way. This idea of talking about your feelings, I have a real, personally, with regards to a lot of, trauma is real and it does need to be dealt with. But at the same time, I think there is a balance where you don't celebrate it either. I would get into some discussions with, other men in like men's group or whatever at church, and people would be like, what's, talking about their woundedness or this and that. And I said, I think there's a place for it, but I don't think that the 19-year-olds that stormed up the beaches of Normandy did that because they talked about how their mother had hurt them when they were 6. So
it's a generational thing, I guess.
Yeah, I guess. I just think that there's the thing that's interesting is, with like what happened to May, you absolutely 100% want that to, not be acceptable, and for kids to feel safe enough. That's what it's about. It's about safety, to be able to confront the problem. And then maybe when we know you can confront the problem, it happens less often, et cetera, et cetera. But at the same time, I think sometimes we get, we can get preoccupied with, navel gazing. I know that's where I go off the rails sometimes. I just get so stuck in your own head. And sometimes you just got to wake up and go, it's not about you. Just got to put your big boy pants on and go to work.
So let's just drag you back a little bit. Going through school then, so you weren't top of the class, you sort of didn't see the academic side as that important until, I guess, a bit later. So what was your favourite subject, the one that you couldn't wait to get up and go to school for?
Well, it was still the sciences. I had a really excellent physics teacher in 11th grade, and I did terrible in physics in university, but he made it really super interesting. All of the sciences. Yeah, had some really amazing chemistry teachers. That stuff actually helped me out a lot in the first, because the 100 level classes in university are essentially a rapid review of high school, all done in a year. And so that was clearly the sciences. I had no real mega interest in English or anything, but honestly, probably if I would have not gone into medicine, I would have become a history teacher, because the interest that I got through that, in high school and then after high school, and where I am now as far as what I find the most captivating is really kind of going through history and unpacking a lot of why did this happen and what can we learn from it. And so that's probably really my favorite. And again, 11th grade was really the year, and we had just an absolutely phenomenal 11th grade history teacher. 12th grade history was pretty boring because it's Canadian history, which is not very exciting. There wasn't a lot of wars. There wasn't people chopping. You guys got all the guys chopping heads off because they wanted a different wife. We got a guy that got drunk once in a while.
So So history then. What is your favourite period in history to study?
Oh, I think the early 20th century is, for me right now. I've become really pretty obsessed with World War One. I think World War One is sets the stage for absolutely everything that happened after it. It's not World War Two. If there was no World War One, there wouldn't be World War Two. If there was not World War Two, there wouldn't be the rocket technology we have. There wouldn't be the computer technology that we have. But it all steps back for me as far as what we're dealing with in the world now. Like whether you want to talk about economic issues, the Middle East stuff that's gone on, even how COVID has been dealt with. That is all from World War One, and most people don't even know that World War One existed, let alone that it is this
Yeah.
most formative 4 years in the last probably 200. I mean, I, I I mean, I think unquestionably World War One has way more to do with how the world works than anything preceding and really anything since then. It set the stage for everything. The United Nations, like just go. Like, I mean, I could rattle on and on and on for about this. That I find it so unbelievably fascinating, and plus, it's forgotten. Like, I just can't get over that. I mean, nobody even knew about the 1918. I used to talk to patients about 1918 flu pandemic and how devastating it was, and nobody even really thought twice about it until 2 years ago. And I'm like, no, you don't understand. That killed more people than World War One, and it happened at the same time.
I have a personal interest in World War II, especially the Holocaust and what happened um, in the concentration camps. I read a lot of fiction, but also nonfiction stories of people that were survivors from there, and I gravitate to those. I think because when I was in the travel club, that was the other fun thing in my childhood. We had this amazing travel club put on by our history teacher, and he would actually take high school students to Europe. Can you imagine? I can't even imagine doing that now, but there'd be like it's a couple parent volunteers, but there was a group of like 20, 25 of us. And so when I was in 10th grade, I went to Germany, Austria, Switzerland, but I actually got to walk through Dachau, and um, wow, it's creepy because I can even just feel like I can transport myself there again now. That memory will never leave me. But I think what I find fascinating about it, Tim's fascinated with World War One, but for me, the stories from World War Two is two things: the both extremes, how people and humanity could be duped and go along with the acts of horror that they did. I mean, there's true evil people, and then how
Yeah.
just people that normally wouldn't think of doing such things got in line and did what they were told in the name of just following orders.
Or just follow the
Follow,
science.
yes, which we could parallel
Yeah.
to things going on today, but also from the people, from the Jews and the people in the concentration camp, the resilience and the faith and the strength and the hope and the toughness and the what these people did to keep living and just standing up for what they believed in and helping one another, and how that the survivors that did make it just I get inspiration from that as and I wish we could just get more of those stories, but it was horrible what they went through, but it just is amazing to me, their strength and fortitude. So that's a part of history I like.
Well, funny you should say that. There's one of my favourite books is a film as well, but the film only depicts the first half of the book pretty much, but the book itself depicts a sergeant major in the Royal Artillery called Charlie Charlie Coward, and he in the second part of the war he got captured, escaped a few times, and ended up working in a work camp not far from Auschwitz, and he managed to free or help escape a lot of Jews, and it's a fantastic read. It's called The Password is Courage by John Castle,
I haven't read that.
and the film is called The Password is Courage, and it's Dirk Bogart stars in it
Okay.
as Charlie Coward, and it's a really good film and a really good book. It's just a shame that the book didn't depict the second half of the book, because the part where he was freeing Jews from the concentration camps at Auschwitz.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, I was read an awful lot of escape books. I used to collect first edition escape books, and I used to have a big collection years ago, but I haven't got it any longer.
Wow.
But there you go. That's what you get from history. You learn from it, and there's so many people nowadays trying to change history, which you can't do. You can't change history. You can make it, but you can't change it, and they don't get that. But there you go. So coming back to Tim then. So what was the worst subject that you did at school? Which one did you want to play hooky for? Which one didn't you want to get up in the morning for?
Well, it would be either English or math. I was not very good at it's weird because I mean I could memorize lists of stuff, and I had a degree in anatomy before I went into medicine, and so I mean I could endless lists of whatever, but I was like math was not intuitive to me, and I know it was to May. And now we have a son who's going to be graduating aerospace engineering here in about 4 months. And I'm like, that's all he does is math. He goes, well, it's really easy. And I'm like, no, not for me, but so that would definitely be.
It makes sense because I think of when the kids were growing up, and you know how they have the homework. Well, it's off if there's two parents. Sometimes they divvy up the homework. Well, we did it by. He would say, "I am not doing math. I hate math. I can't help them with math." And I'm like, "Perfect. That's my thing. I'll take care of the math." And then writing the essays. He was good at that. I'm like, you can free associate anything. Just go ahead and help with writing these.
It's so funny. Our daughter had to write an argument about a Supreme Court case for a university, and so she called me, and I was actually out for a walk at lunch at work, and I just said, "Okay, look up this case, and then look up this case. This is the years that the cases started. This is the precedents that they set. This is how they." And she's just like literally taking notes, and she comes back. She goes, "Yeah, I did really well. I got an A on that paper." And I'm like, "Well."
Brilliant. So the next thing is you obviously graduated high school and you went to university, and that's where you guys met. So was it like the old love at first sight, or was it something sort of slow burning that took a bit of time to work on?
Oh boy, you've opened a can now. Yeah, I think it was an overnight success in about 2 years. You talk to guys about businesses and how they push the rock up the hill forever, and all of a sudden they're super popular in 2 months. And it was interesting because I had really no idea kind of what May's feelings really were for me, but we were really good friends, and so we just did a lot of stuff together, and we're just friends. And then I finally clued in that I should probably not lose this one because she's like, I'm marrying so far over my head, I need an oxygen mask. So it really started with friendship, but she can fill you in on the details of she actually pursued me, believe it or not.
Yeah. So from my perspective and point of view, we met obviously in medical school class. I was actually, it's a long story, but I was in a different class ahead of Tim a couple of years. Had a series of, I had an accident where I tore my ACL playing girls football. It was like a med school girls team versus these really tough the agros we call them, and they were beasts. And I got my knee blown up playing football in college. There you go. And to the point,
gridiron football, not
American football. Yes, throwing. It was supposed to be flag, where you had this little flag in your pocket, and they're supposed to pull the flag, but no, it was all tackle. It was,
but it was awesome because that medical school team had an Olympic athlete sprinter on the team, which was awesome.
Didn't help my knee though. But anyway, so in the fall of this one year, that happened. Had the ACL injury. I wasn't doing very well in school. I was still struggling with my bulimia and depression. My grades were going down, and I really was questioning whether I wanted to really be a doctor or not. And so I dropped out or took a leave. They said you can think about it. You're free to come back. So the second half of the year, I was out, and then got help in the summer. Went to that counseling, figured out my knee situation. Long story. When I did come back into medicine the following year, I was in Tim's class. So that's how we got to be friends. And we mostly sat beside each other in lectures. That's how it started. And then we started chatting and became friends and had common interests. And we did rock climbing together. And over time, short amount of time, I started to really become fond of him. And we were just collegial friends, but I started to have more feelings for him. And I knew he didn't feel the same way back. So it was really difficult. And what happened was this fun little story about how I courted him. And this is how it goes. We had these little groups of 5 or 6 students that would do these rotations in clinical medicine. And we would go out to the first couple of years, like to hospital, or I was with the group that was going to a children's special ed school, etc. And we would go out, and I was out on a rotation with some, my colleagues, and we'd see Tim's vehicle parked, or he parked to go to university. And so I said, "Oh, we should play a trick on Tim. There's this vehicle," and they just never thought about it. And so I wrote this note, and it was an anonymous note about someone who was following him, and I put it on his vehicle. And I did this a few times, and then we would come back to the common lounge at lunchtime where all the med students met, and there was only 60 of us in our class. It was a small medical school class, so we get together in groups. And I remember him sitting there going, "I'm getting these anonymous notes on my vehicle," and every few days I'd put a new one, and he's like, "These are really weird, and someone says they're stalking me, and then they say that they like me." And they were trying to figure out the puzzle, him and some other friends. So then I thought, oh, this is kind of fun, and I carried it a little further, and I then put some notes in his locker. So we had lockers where we kept all of our stuff, and I started to write these kind of love notes, and with little hints about me and my past, but things that he didn't really know. There was these unknown things that were clues. And so I made these rhyming poems, and I was planning on carrying this on until Valentine's Day. And then I thought, I'll just tell him then if I get up the courage. So we would sit around as he found these notes, and he'd bring them he's like, "Yeah, I got another one." And there'd be a group of 6 or 8 of us. We'd sit down, and I'd disguise my handwriting, and we would joke about who it was. Well, anyway, I tried to keep that going, but what happened was we ended up going out to a church concert or something, right? A week before Valentine's Day. And that's when he said, "I think I figured out who this person is. I think it's you." And then I'm like, "Okay, well, now you know that I'm like massively in love with you." So are the feelings reciprocal or not? Because I'm totally embarrassed if not. And he's like, "Yeah, I think you're okay." So we officially started dating Valentine's Day of that year. And a year later, we got engaged.
Yeah, we got engaged on February the 13th because February the 14th would be too obvious.
So yeah, we had a quick whirlwind romance over 1 year, which while you're in medical school is kind of difficult. But also, it's a time when you're going through intense stuff as med students. And we got to experience a lot in our program. I mean, obviously we get to see life and death as med students, and you're going through like the depths of humanity and emotions of that. And you're growing up really quick, and you're with this group of, 60 people, actually even less so, as you form little smaller groups of friends that you're really close with. And so you become really connected, and you rely on them for a lot of emotional support, studying support. So we do form really close bonds quickly in those situations, which is not unusual. And anyway, we got engaged a year later. And honestly, what happened then was we got engaged, and it was at the final year of med school. So what happens is when you finish medicine and you graduate med school, then you go on to they've changed it. You go right into residency programs now pretty much, but it was internship year and residency. And in Canada, the US, a lot of places, they have what's called the match system, because you can choose where you would like to do your specialty training, your internship or specialty training, and you can go for your interviews. And the program might pick you, but not someone else, So what happens is they have a couples match. So if there's a married couple in medicine or a couple that wants to be guaranteed that they're in the same place, you could enter the couples match, meaning they have to, whatever program we're in, they have to accept both of us or none of us. So we're at a junction. I said, if we don't decide what we're doing together with our lives, if we're not sure we're going to have this relationship go further, I mean, once we apply for a residency, we could end up in 2 different places across the country, and long distance relationship is going to be very difficult. So we have to decide, are we going to enter the couples match together? And if we are, why don't we just get married? So that was my way of saying, just propose, darn it. So he did.
Did he get down on one knee and do it properly?
He did. So he was acting all weird. I figured he was going to ask me to marry him on Valentine's. And then he started asking weird things like, we haven't gone rock climbing in a long time. I think we should go rock climbing. And I would say, why? Are you going to go hide a ring, in one of the handholds? And he's like, oh, how come I can't surprise you? So anyway, we went to get our graduation photos taken for medicine. And it was bizarre because he came to pick me up. We were going to both get our picture done the same time. And I thought, he seems cranky or something's going on. He's just really irritable and he's not really fun to be around. And I'm like, I don't know what's bothering him. So when I got sat down and I'm getting my picture taken, and with my robe and the books, and I'm sitting there and smiling, and the girl's taking my picture, Tim said, well, if she's going to be sitting in the photo holding these books and you can see her hands, maybe she should be wearing this. And then he got down on one knee and proposed and slipped on my engagement ring. And then there was actual photos taken of the proposal. And as Tim says, I started to make walrus or harp seal sounds and started crying and gasping. And so, yes, I said yes. And then he smiled and was in a good mood while he got his photos taken. And then we decided, okay, let's get married sooner than later. So we actually, oh gosh, this is funny. So he proposed, and then I had to get my ACL fixed. I hadn't had that fixed yet. And I had 1 month of a vacation time left, and it was the end of, it was like May, and April. I can't remember. It was close to in there. I went in hospital. It was back in the day when they kept you in hospital for a week for these ACL surgeries. I'm not kidding. Like now you're in and out. It's day surgery. They do it. They send you home. Well, they had me in a hospital for a week. So I planned our wedding from my hospital bed for a week. And then I had like 3 weeks of recovery, and I did an easy rotation. And so we planned our wedding and got married within 3 months. We thought we'll get married right after we graduate med school, which we did. We graduated on a Thursday in May, got married on a Sunday so that all our friends could be there. And then we had a 2-week break where we took our honeymoon before we started our residency, and we moved away. So there's the courtship, the engagement, the graduation, all that.
Yeah.
So you managed to get the same residency.
Yes. Yeah. So we ranked, we had a really good program where we went to medical school, really well known throughout Canada. We went to and interviewed 4 different places, and we ranked, we were in Western Canada that we were mostly interested in staying, and we ranked our places. And our top choice was Edmonton at the University of Alberta. And they ranked us number 1. So we got our first choice in family practice. And that's where we went. We moved to Edmonton and spent 2 years there doing our family practice residency.
So once you finish that qualifies you to be what GPs, and or did you specialise then? What happened next?
Well, okay, so we go we go through residency, which in and of itself is a whole other story because we're working, 36-hour shifts and trying to figure out how to be married. Partway through that, May's sister comes in and lives with us for a while, which we thought would be, somebody to help with the bills. That ended up being a major challenge in and of itself for a whole bunch of reasons. And
Yeah, 6 months. We were only married 6 months, and then my parents asked if she could move in because she was going through her own things. Yeah. So
that was. I mean, it's kind of, you're kind of in a 2-year survival mode. Family practice residencies in the United States now are 3 years, so ours was a little bit shorter. And so we got that done, and about, oh man, 6 months before we were finished, the phone rings and it's this random recruiter, like just cold calling us. And he's like, "Do you want to move to the United States?" And we're like, "Well, I don't know, not really. I kind of had a job lined up for both of us, but I probably drove the bus on this one. Geography was critically important to where I wanted to live because I grew up on the prairies, and I was, I lived in Whistler. I took a year off between undergrad and medical school, and I skied 100 days that year, and I wanted to be around, water and mountains. Like that was it. So this guy calls us and says, "Do you want to come to the United States?" I'd say, if you can put me within 2 hours of the Columbia Gorge and 2 hours of mountains, then sure. Otherwise, forget it. I'll pursue our opportunity we have in British Columbia. So the guy calls us back and he says, "Do you want to go to this, check this place out?" And we're like, "Yeah, okay. Well, we'll come down." We had no idea where any of this was. We'd never been there. We'd vacationed quite a bit in Oregon in the Columbia Gorge with windsurfing because I was just completely maniacal with regards to the sport. And we come down here into the Willamette Valley, which is a gorgeous place. And we're like, "Oh, it seems like a pretty good deal. Seems like a good group." Kind of, hour and a half from the Pacific Ocean, a couple hours from the Columbia Gorge, hour and a half from, skiing. Yeah, let's give it a go. And that's been 28 years. So it worked out quite well. It was a great place to raise a family. Was able to do tons of action sports, which I was into. Dirt bike riding, barefoot water skiing, skydiving, et cetera, et cetera. And so that was kind of how we ended up here. What's gone on in the last 28 years again is another entire story.
So are you in general practice, or have you specialised, or bring us up to sort of date of brush over the 28 years to get to where you are now then?
Well, when we started off, so our residency training was, yes, in family practice, which is like general medicine, birth to death. You can do obstetrics and pediatrics. We both got obviously trained in that all the way through to taking care of geriatrics, nursing home. We did hospital medicine, etc. So when we moved down here and started working, my choice was to work part-time, and I was still figuring out whether I wanted to do this as a career or not, still struggling with medicine. But so I worked part-time, and I did choose not to do an OB practice in family practice because I liked sleep too much. I had struggled with in med school. I had mono really severely for 8 months, and it affected my immune system a lot. I wouldn't call it chronic fatigue, but I had EBV virus stuff for many years. And so I really needed my 8 to 9 hours to 10 hours of sleep. So as much as I loved it, I chose not to do obstetrics. And Tim's he did obstetrics as well as a full practice. We both did nursing home patients at the time, we took care of our own patients and call group. So we were on different call schedules because I worked in a clinic in another town from him, and we were on separate call schedules. So we would do ICU call, take care of and around on our own group of patients, call on the weekends and at night on different schedules. And so that was really erratic. We, for the first 5 years when we didn't have kids, he'd be on call for OB one night and I'd be on hospital call for our group another. And then he'd be on regular hospital patient call. And it was, very busy. And then with time, I changed practices a lot for various reasons, but I ended up joining the building and the group of people that Tim was at and helped do family practice over there for a while. I bumped around and would also do some locums within our massive hospital group and would help fill in other physicians' practices. Once we had children, I kind of took some time off. I even actually played his nurse for a while. His nurse quit suddenly. She gave her 2 weeks notice, and we were kind of in between kids. Our daughter was just a few months old, and I said, well, I'll find a babysitter for her and I'll come in and I'll be your nurse since, I think I can do most of it. I can give the injections. And then, if you're off doing a delivery, I will just take care of patients if need be. I can do all the prescriptions. So that lasted 10 months. And then I'm like, I've had enough of taking orders from you. They can find another nurse. Plus they only paid me starting nurse wages. So it was quite demoralizing to not have a higher salary. So, and I went back and actually worked as a physician again. We did that, I'm trying to think, up until 2010. I pulled the plug on family practice and switched over to started doing urgent care practice. So things had changed so much. There was kind of chronic medicine, and I missed the acute things like lacerations, broken bones. We just couldn't work those in anymore into a regular practice. And I missed seeing the really sick people, which is, we had a lot of training. And so I did urgent care starting in 2010 and Tim did from 2013, but we've done everything. We initially started, we were the coroners. We would go and do death investigations. What else can you think of?
Yeah, no, I mean, if anyone has watched Call the Midwife, that we were Dr. Turner. I mean,
yeah,
it was exactly that kind of cradle
house
to grave.
calls.
Yeah.
Yeah. You never delivered a baby in a house, but close.
Come really close.
So yeah, we love that show, Call the Midwife, but pretty much it was old style medicine when we started, and it's changed dramatically now since, it's big corporations. And we did urgent care until the last couple of years. And now we've actually gone back to our roots. We live in a small town of about 11,000. And one of our former residents that we helped train has started a little practice here in town. And we've been helping him start it up and get it going. And that's how we're kind of looking at fading into the retirement years, so to speak.
Oh. So what does retirement hold for you guys then? You're obviously still fairly fit. Are you going to be able to sort of take up a round of golf, get your golf bats out, or are you going to go windsurfing and skiing in the winter, or you're just going to what are you going to do?
Well, again, it depends on how you define retirement. I think either of us could stay and see patients for a bit longer, but we would both like to, I know I speak for myself, just kind of retire from actual medical practice. We have a podcast. We love doing that. The people we've met in the last 2 years of that podcast has been absolutely awe-inspiring. It's been very encouraging to us as far as, there's other things that we can do. We can use our experience and our training in less traditional ways. Yes, there'll be lots of activities. I will golf. Yes, I will. I've switched. I'm slowly starting to switch over from windsurfing to kiting because it's a little easier to transport that stuff and it's not as hard on your body. and I would try to ski until honestly I'm in a wheelchair. That is, and I ride a motorcycle. You know, I mean, I ride about 5,000 miles a year. So from a recreation perspective, I think I have that part covered. We just have to figure out how to continue to finance it. And I think in the next 2 years, really what the plan is, our house is for sale. And if that goes well, we'll work a little bit and get in a motorhome and just drive across the country until we get bored of that.
Yeah, what we didn't really touch on in our story is the big part of our lives have been activity focused, and I think Tim's theme has always been work to support your hobbies and activities, and he's been a high sensation seeking activities director of our household, and I have gotten dragged into the loop. I would try anything and usually be the one to get hurt. But we've done all kinds of things, and I think we both love being active, and we'll probably go out trying and dying hard. We won't give up. So we do what we can as we get older and injured, and arthritis and our limitations happen. But give us something to do, and we'll be out there having fun doing it. And we love podcasting, and so we plan to just stay pretty active for sure.
Well, I can recommend retirement, and there's a few things I can recommend. Is one, plan for your retirement, so you've got enough money to be able to scrape by.
Right.
Live every day as though it's your last, because one day it will be. And the last thing you want to do is turn up at the pearly gates with an unused body and a load of regrets. When I get there, it's going to be an absolutely wreck. No regrets.
Yeah.
I think I checked that box, the last one, the used up body. But yes, good points.
Man, I used to never get injured. Like, I ran 12 marathons in my 30s and when did I finish running marathons? I don't know, early 40s. 600 skydives. I went over the handlebars of motorcycles more times than I could count, on and on and on. And then, man, the first injury I got, it's just like it's like it never stopped after that,
So what motorbike do you have?
I have two. I have a KTM 790 Duke, which is it's called a naked sport bike. I'm a big naked sport bike fan. That is one of the easiest, most fun bikes in the world to ride. And then I have a 2016 Softail Slim S Harley, which I have made fit me properly, and I can ride that bike for 800 miles at a go if I had to. It's just super comfortable and has lots of power. And we ride that across the country at least once a year. So,
I've got a 1200 multi-strider Ducati.
Okay.
And I love it to bits. I went out on Saturday. I drove 170 miles just to watch a game of rugby, and 170 miles back to get onto a podcast.
Wow. You're a hardcore guy too, then.
Yeah, people don't get it, and to try to describe it is, I've thought of doing aviation stuff. Our son is very interested in that, but I'm like, I don't know. I got enough stuff to do, and I like riding so much. You start to realize that there's certain things you can't really dabble in. If you're going to do them, you really got to do them well. And I'd skydived a lot in previous years, but once I realized, I'm not going enough times, then I just said, I can retire from the sport. If I want to get back into it, it's easy to get back into, but you got to stay current. And it's the same with riding. I mean, these people rode dirt bikes when they're 12, and they're going to, they buy Harleys when they're 55. And I'm like, dude, take a course.
I've been riding motorbikes since I was 10.
Yeah.
And I've had bikes all the way through. And I've had lots of miles on motorbikes. Done a lot of skiing as well. I'm a telemark skier.
Oh, okay.
I used to do Nordic as well. I was a Nordic instructor, but telemark I've raced, and I was on the first Army telemark team that took on the Navy. and I've taken part in the British Telemark Championships a couple of dozen times over the years. So
Awesome.
yeah,
Good for
telemark
you.
is the way forward. I mean, telemark skiing
If
is
you've got the knees for it, in mine,
it's
yeah.
it's a lot kinder on the knees than alpine skiing.
Oh,
Um,
that's true.
it's a little bit tougher on the thighs. I'll
Yeah.
give you that one, but it's just a different technique. It's just a different turning technique, and when you get as graceful as it just makes the alpine skiers look at you green with envy.
And the ability to ski tour and just take your skins off and you're going, you're not
Yeah,
converting all this equipment and et cetera, et cetera. Yeah.
yeah,
No,
absolutely. Backcountry skiing, you've got to love it. It's got telemark touring, we used to call it, and it's great. The army have a different way of doing it, obviously, and the skis they give you, or they're the pussers planks, we used to call them, and they give you a big pork or a big burgen to carry at the same time. They take the fun out of it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's work. Then I've
that'd be a
not.
good motto.
Yeah.
Army, we take the fun out of everything.
Absolutely. So that's where you guys are. So what is your podcast about?
Well, I'll take that to start with. It's called BS Free MD, and it is, I think, aptly named. I did a lot of leadership throughout my career. Did some insurance company work for the insurance companies that the system we worked for owned. So I saw a lot of stuff that I started to scratch my head about and go, okay, like what the heck? How come every single thing that we do that has to do with medical practice quality ends up with a prescription? Where did that come from? How come every government diktat seems to protect pharmaceutical companies and insurance companies and not necessarily the patient? So I had been obnoxiously irritating in a lot of meetings with regards to kind of where the evolution of healthcare, so to speak, was going. And then COVID hit and started to rip the scab off of the whole world, in my opinion. And so we started doing Facebook live streams in March of 2020 because we had people like killing our inbox with questions. And we were off work for a couple of weeks because of the pandemic. And so we're like, okay, well, we'll just start answering questions. People can write in and we'll give you the best, answers that we can based on, history and et cetera, et cetera. And then as the pandemic evolved, as things started to show themselves, we're like, there's a lot more here than I think we're being told. So we started the podcast, which we wanted to do anyways, in January of 2021. And the people that we have met and the rabbit holes we've gone down have been just absolutely amazing. I mean, we hit on the fentanyl crisis. We interviewed a family who lost a child to an accidental fentanyl overdose. We interviewed a guy who infiltrated the Chinese fentanyl drug labs and wrote a book about it. Ben Westhoff. The book is Fentanyl Inc. Unbelievable. We have interviewed Steve Torrance, who is the world champion, top fuel dragster champion, who had a bunch of medical challenges in his life and was able to overcome them and become a 4-time world champion. Eddie Braun, who's a stuntman. We did a whole episode on fear and facing fear and how are you a stuntman for 43 years and not dead or disabled? And then of course, tons of COVID stuff. Harvey Risch, Peter McCullough, a lot of these guys. We actually just spent another hour with Peter today, kind of updating where things are going. And so not really afraid to tackle anything. Not really afraid of people with divergent opinions. We've done a lot on physical training, which is really important to us, on how to stay fit, on the best medicine. I mean, you are your best doctor. The best doctor is you, that takes care of yourself, controls what you put in your body and how much exercise you get. So that's the podcast in a nutshell. We've just had an amazing time. We've made tons of friends. We've traveled around the country, hanging out with people that we just met virtually. And it's been it's just been super rewarding, and hopefully we can grow it enough where it supplements our income enough that we, can basically just do this, because that's what I think this is what we would prefer to do. And I think we have an interesting voice, but I don't know. Maybe it's just me. Maybe I'm not.
Well, that's terrific. So where can people get hold of the podcast?
We're on all the major platforms. So Spotify, Apple Podcast, iHeart, etc. And then bsfreemd.com is the website, and everything is linked in there. We're going to start to do more video, I think, because I think it's important, and we haven't done as much. We're on Instagram, Facebook, not on Twitter, though. Maybe we should, but I find Twitter so irritating that I don't really want to take part in it. So,
yeah, I'll tend to agree with you on that one. So, May, Tim, thank you so much. I've really enjoyed this chat.
Hey, our pleasure. It was fun sharing our, birth to current, to date experiences in a time capsule, I guess, so to speak.
The Tim Heale Podcasts. Ordinary people's extraordinary stories.